Okay, welcome to today's lesson. First of all, there's an important announcement to make. This Friday we won't have the lab because there is the Salone dell'Orientamento, something like that. So there is no class. So, I wanted to ask you. My proposal for this is, since we don't have the lab on Friday, and I don't want we to remain behind with this topic, especially with Flask, because it's important. Maybe my proposal is doing the lab next Tuesday. Since, in this hour, we can do the lab in this hour, so we don't stay behind the topic. So that would mean that on Monday we would have like the regular lesson here, the regular lesson like yesterday, and in the Tuesday we will use the space here and the time here to have the lab session. And in that case, you could have, this room is pretty big, so I don't think we will have problems with the space, and you can stay 3 hours if you want. So if you agree, we can do it that way. Also, because the next week we will also lose the lab because there is already like the Easter holidays. So I don't want. Next Tuesday, the 3 April, we don't have the lab, and the week after that we won't have lesson. We will miss a lot of lessons this week and next week. So my proposal, if you agree, is next week we can have the lab here, and so we don't stay behind. Anyway, if you want, I can publish the text today as usual, if anyone wants to start working on that. And anyway, next week on Tuesday you will have the space to work on it. Okay? So do you agree with? Are we fine with that? Perfect. Nice. So today my proposal is, let's try to implement what we have done yesterday with Flask, but in our project in Imparato. And let's see how can we make our application work with Flask and work with the remote server, the remote web server. That is what we are trying to implement. Okay. So here as usual, you can download everything from the repository. Here we have the demo folder and we have the exercise folder. Okay, so in the demo is what we have done yesterday, and now we will focus on the exercise folder. So if we want, this exercise folder up to now is like the static HTML with the CSS. So if we want to transform this into a Flask project, what should we do first? Where do we start? Also because this is what you will have to do with the next lab. Okay. So what's the first step? Yeah.
Create app.py.
Yeah. Create app.py. So here within the folder, within the exercise folder, I will create app.py. Can I give any name I want to this file? Yes, I can. But the reason I give app.py is because when I run the file, I can just run by executing Flask run. If I give another name to that file, I would have to execute through a different command line. So the easiest way is to name that file app.py. Okay. So this is like the regular initialization of the file. Can you see the code there behind? Do you see it fine? Okay. Okay, then what do I initialize in the Flask file? the roots, no? It basically works as defining roots, and then for each root, setting what I'm going to retrieve. So in this case, we may start with the we can just set like this regular, this very basic root, in which I'm saying the main path of the URL will be associated with a function that is called home, but I can call this function however I want. Root, index, but in this case, let's call it home. And what should happen is that when in the browser I open the local host in the root path, it should show me this message. How do I execute the application? I open the terminal, and we just have to make sure that we are opening the terminal within this folder, or that we are in that position of the computer, in that location of the computer when we want to run Flask run. So in Visual Studio Code, as I told you last time, the easiest option is to click on the folder and then to click open in the integrated terminal. Here, I already know that I'm within the folder, that I'm stepped in that location, and then I execute Flask run. Then, as I told you, when we are implementing the application, the best option is to set also the debug flag, so that every change that we do on the application is immediately reflected into the running application. Okay, so here we usually run this with debug. And we can see in the server that Imparato is working. Okay. Now, of course, this is not what we want to retrieve when the user goes to the root path. What is what we want to retrieve? We want to retrieve the home page that we have already implemented in HTML. No? So what's the way to return the web page? By using the render template function. No? And in this case, the file is named index.html. So that when the user goes to the root path, the web server will retrieve the index.html file. Will this work? Yes, no? Let's try. So it doesn't work. Why? Because Flask is expecting to find the HTML files within the templates folder. Okay? So I have to set all of the HTML files within the templates folder. And the templates folder has to have that specific name. It must be named templates. Okay, so let's. Here within the exercise folder, we will create templates. Okay, so now we can see that it works. Okay, that when I go to the root location, it retrieves me the home page that we have implemented and designed last time. What is not working? The images, right? Why? Because for the images, we have to create a new folder that is called static, and within that folder we can create an images folder and set the images within that specific folder. So far so good? It's clear up to now? It's working? Perfect. Here in the index, do you remember how do we now reference the images? Because up to now, with what we have done, we reference the images in this way, no? But do you remember that yesterday we saw that the images and the resources that we are pointing, the external resources, are not anymore pointed in this way, but by using a Jinja function that is called URL2, okay? Do you remember it was the last time that we did yesterday? So that now, as here you can see that now the image, the source of the image is pointed by using a Jinja function. How do we know this is a Jinja function? Because it is open with the curly brackets, so we know that in there we have an expression. And then, because we are using this specific function that is called URL4, okay? So basically, with Flask and with Jinja, what we are doing is trying to interleave HTML code with dynamic code that Flask knows how to interpret and knows how to use to generate dynamically the website. So in this case, it is URL4. We are pointing to the static folder that it was the one we created. And within that static folder, we are saying that the file name is located into the folder images, and that the file is called imparato.png. And let me check. There was another point of the code in which the okay, so now we are fine with the images. Since I'm using Bootstrap, the CSS from Bootstrap, and in my CSS I don't have anything, here in my custom CSS I don't have anything because I've been using just Bootstrap. But for instance, in our case, it is normal that we will have our own code in the CSS. So how are we going to deal with our personal CSS? It will be also managed as an external resource, as an image in here. So we should move the style.css to the static folder. Maybe here we can create a new folder that is called styles, and within that styles folder we can move the CSS. And of course, in the index.html we will reference that style sheet, not anymore like this, not anymore like href style.css, but how? Using the URL for function, okay? The same as the images. Okay, so up to now, is it clear? Does it work for you? Okay, so up to this point, we've been able to basically set up like the landing page, so that on the root location of the URL, the web server is now retrieving this landing page. Now let's try to create a new page in our web application, to implement a new page. So for instance, let's try to implement this one. Find a tutor. So let's try to create this find a tutor page. How would you imagine this page? What should it show? Maybe a list of the current available tutors, no? Maybe yeah, a card for each tutor showing who we have in the register in our application, which are the tutors that we have registered in our application. So we can create this find a tutor website page, and then we can make this button or this link to point to that specific page, so that when I click to find a tutor, it will redirect me to a page where I can see the list of the tutors that I have there. Okay, so you tell me, how do we implement that page? What is the first step, or what we should do first? Yeah, the HTML file would be, of course, we will have to do the HTML file, but what else? Even before that? The creating a route for that specific page, right? So here, I will say that my application which path do I want to give to that route? Maybe tutors, that is a path that gives me a sense of what it means or what the resource there is. So let's say tutors. Then I define a function that is associated with that specific path I'm creating. So in this case, Also tutors would work. So just to make ourselves sure that it is working, here in the browser, if we write here tutors, it will show us that tutors page. Okay. And here in our main page, we want that by clicking here on Find a Tutor or by clicking here in Find a Tutor, it will take us to a page, to a new URL that we have just defined, right? So how to make that work? Here we'll find, okay, Find a Tutor. And in this specific link, you see here we have the link or Find a Tutor button. So in here, what are we going to write? URL for tutors. Why for tutors? Because that's the way how we called our function. So since our function here is tutors, in the website we say that the link here will point to a URL that is associated with the function tutors. Okay. Let's see if it works. No, let me check if the syntax is correct. Okay, no, because I thought I was working on this link, and instead I was working on this one, on Find a Tutor. So now when I click, it will point me to the page that we are creating right now. And then let's do it for the other button, that is the one below. So find a Okay, so this one is also working. I have to set up this one so that because right now, since it is a link, it is showing blue, and it gets lost with the background. But anyway, okay, when I click it, then it redirects me to the page. Okay. So up to now, I know that I have a new route that is called tutors, and that from the page, when I go to that specific location, I get retrieved the page that I will build for tutors, and that from the main landing page, I can also add the links to point to that position. Okay, so far that's what we have done. And now I agree with you that we have to start working on the tutors HTML. Okay, so that instead of retrieving just this message, it will retrieve me, it will give me the HTML associated with that specific function. So let's create the tutors page. Where should I create the HTML for the tutors? Within the templates, okay? So let's call it tutors. And here there is something important. How should this tutors page look like? I mean, where do I get inspiration for that tutors page structure? Do I start creating that HTML from scratch, or do I try to use some components of this main page? I would say that from here we will reuse some of the components, no? That it will have common components with the page that I'm trying to create. So for instance, I could say that the header will be the same, because even if I'm in the landing page or if I am in the tutors page, the header should be the same. Also because by having the same header, I'm giving the option to navigate through these links. So there is a portion of the page that will remain exactly the same. I would say that in the tutors page, it would also make sense to have the sign in and the register button, okay? And for sure, the footer will remain the same. Do we all agree with this? Okay, so I won't start here from scratch, but what I will do is copy paste the sections of my page, of the landing page that make sense in the tutors page. So for instance, the header, the main navigation, also the main class container with nothing without the content. It's also useful here. Okay, close the main content and then all of the footer. So now when I click find a tutor, okay, and what are we missing? Here, instead of returning this message, we will return Here I'm in the landing page, and when I click on Find a Tutor, it will basically redirect me to the tutor space. The tutor space, that is the one we're building right now, okay? Up to now, is it clear what we have done so far? Okay. Now we have to think what we want to show in here. So maybe we want to show a card for each one of the tutors that we will have in our application. So let's see in Bootstrap which component we can get. Well, let's use this one and let's see what happens. Because with this one, I'm thinking that here we could have like the tutor's image, and here his name and some description. Okay, so let's see if this one important. Do you see that here in this example, the Bootstrap example, they directly do the inline styling? That is what we have always said that we won't do, never. So here in this case, they do this because they want to display this correctly on the page. But then, of course, when we will use this specific component, we will just delete this specific styling. Okay, because we have said that we will never write or mix up the HTML code with the CSS code. So if, for instance, we wanted to give this property of a max width to the card that we are creating, what's the correct way of doing this? Creating a CSS rule and then applying the CSS rule to this specific component. Okay. So here they do this not because it is correct, but because they want to display this card into the examples web page. Okay. Okay, well, up to now, let's try to keep it this way. Let's say that here we could change the image with our logo, just to use like a placeholder in there. So here, for instance, we could say URL. And then we will have something like this, okay? This is what we are trying to create. Nice. So up to now, this is static, no? I just created an HTML as we have done so far, and I've created that specific card, and I have added static data into that specific card. What's the next step, or what is what we should try to implement? We want these tutors that will be displayed here to be dynamically displayed, dynamically generating this page. Something similar with what we did yesterday with the, do you remember the list that we have? With apple, banana, and the other thing. Now we will pass also a dictionary, in this case, of the tutors that we want to display in this page dynamically. Okay, so let's try to see how it could work. So here in the Flask application, indeed, which other information do we want from a tutor? Maybe a description or presentation, something like that. No. What else do we want to show from a tutor? Which other information? The subject, okay. Up to now, we will keep it simple, and we will say that one tutor will be assigned to one subject. Okay. Then when we will design the database, we will try to reason if one tutor is assigned just to one subject, or if one tutor can be assigned to different subjects. Okay. But up to now, we will just leave it as one subject. Ambo. Do we want to have just one tutor in our application? No, maybe we want to deal with three tutors, for instance. Okay. So, for instance, the other tutor will be ID1, ID2. One, two. Well, let's try with Okay, so what structure is this? What did I just created? A dictionary. Okay, so I basically created a dictionary within the app.py application, nothing else. What does that dictionary represent? It represents a list of the tutors that I want in my website. Okay, so as you can see, this data is fake. No, it's data that I've just created, but I'm creating it just to show you how we can pass this tutor's data into the function that will render the template. Okay, so what do you think will be the next step? Here into the render template, I will pass a parameter, the same as we did yesterday with the fruits list. And in this parameter, I will say p tutors, for instance, equal to tutors. Okay, so somehow I'm passing to the function that renders the template the parameter that corresponds to a list of the tutors. What does it mean? It means that in this template tutors, now I can deal or I can play with the p tutors that I'm receiving as a parameter. No? So what do you think I want to do with that specific list? Do I still want to print or to display just this fixed static card? No. I will probably want to print a card for each one of the tutors that I have received as a parameter. How do I implement that? With the conditional structure that we saw yesterday that Jinja provides us. So Jinja provided us that specific functionality for iterating over the tutors that we have received as parameter. So let's try to implement that. Where do I want to set that function? Of course here, no? Before printing, I mean, what I want what I want is that this element, this specific portion of the HTML, repeats for each one of the tutors that I received as a parameter, no? That's like the first thing that I want to create. So here, it should be something like, so I open the for here and I close the for below this one. So let's see if it works. If it works, what should happen? No, it doesn't. Function. Tutors. Well, in this case, okay, something strange happened, but I think it's related to the fact that here I named these tutors the name that is the exactly same name that I used for the function. So it maybe had some confusion there. So let's call this tutors list, and here we'll say okay. So here I'm passing as a parameter the tutors list that I have implemented here, or that I have prepared here. So up to now it is working because it is printing one of these cards for each one of the tutor that it received as a parameter. And since we have 3 tutors, it is printing 3 times the card. Okay. What's the next step, or what is the next thing that we have to change, of course, the data that we are displaying here. We don't want to display anymore one with the same hard-coded message that we wrote in the HTML, but instead of this, we want to print the data that we received from the dictionary, okay? Okay, so here, for instance, here instead of one, what do I want to print? Tutor.name. Okay, since I'm here iterating in this ptutors list and each of the item I reference as tutor, here I can ask for the tutor name. Okay, what is the tutor name, or why do I have this property tutor name? Because here in the list I define that each tutor will have this field that is the name. Okay. Indeed, let me see if this works. So now it works. You know that now it is dynamically loading the data or getting the data that it received from app.py, and it is displaying here. So now it is Juan Pablo Sáenz, Luigi De Rusis, and Alberto Monge, because that's the data that it received from the web server. And we will do exactly the same for the description, and here we will use this label to set the subject, okay? And it was not description, but presentation, no? Okay, so here, now you can see that it is showing the presentation message that I have said before, and here the subject that each one of them has associated, okay? What else do we want to change in this case for each one of them? The image, right? So now how do I deal with the image? Yeah. So in the folder, we should have one image for each one of them. And then here in the my tutors list, ideally, or not ideally, I will have to have image property or an image field. Okay. So that here, instead of setting like a specific or point to a specific image as it was before, that it was file name images dot pointing to the logo, instead of this, I will say here, take as the image the property that each user has, or that each user in the dictionary has associated as its image. So in this case, I will say the file name, you will take the file name from the field image that each one of them has, okay? In this case, I can set, for instance, images. Here, this is important because, as you can see, in the image field, it is not that I'm embedding the image in there. In the image field, I'm specifying where does the image is located. Okay, so this is always the approach. Also, when we will work with the database, it is not that we store the image into the database, but in the database we have a field that describes or points out to the path where the image is found. Okay. So here, for instance, we said that the image corresponding for Alberto can be found in the images folder, and it's called alberto.png. Of course, I still don't have that image. And this is not PNG, okay, it's JPEG. So now you can see that it displays both these random images associated with the specific file or with the root name, okay? let me try something here. Okay. Now I just did some change because I don't know if you notice here in Bootstrap, the component that I used before, it was, or the component that I started working with was this one, but it was an example of a single card, no? But we want to deal with more than one card, and we want them to be well aligned and well displayed with the space, and to create like a kind of a grid with the cards, no? So here there is the example for one component. We first used that component and we fixed everything within one single card. But then below, then there is the documentation for card groups. No? So if we don't want to display just one card but a group of cards, there are some specific classes that we can use. And I liked in particular this example, that is the grid cards. That is the one that maybe is more useful for us. So I don't know if you noticed, but here the challenge is try to identify which classes and which containers do I need to use to what I already have, and how the piece of code that I already have integrates into this specific example. So about the only thing it was that here I had to copy this big container. I had to copy, and for each one of the class, for each one of the cards, I have to use this container with the class call, okay? And then Bootstrap does everything. And instead of using the card that is shown in this example, I integrated the card that I have basically did before, okay? So now I can erase this one. And now we should have something like this, okay? Questions so far? Is it clear? Once again, I know I've been telling this thousands of times, but is it clear conceptually what's the difference of doing the things as we are doing them now compared to what we were doing before? It is like before we were sketching the HTML, the CSS, and we were dealing with the visual part of the application, okay? Now we're dealing with the web server in such a way that we have an application that is our Flask application that receives our request, that is the request that we have done here in the server by calling tutors, by calling the root path, and that application retrieves us, composes and retrieves us dynamically an HTML with what we want, okay? So now that we have a backend and we have a web server, we can do a request like tutors, and it is that application that retrieves us the HTML populated dynamically with the tutors that in that moment are registered in the application, okay? So this is completely different, there is like a different component in there. As I told you yesterday, I repeat and repeat this a lot because since we are doing everything in our computer, we might get the impression that everything is running in our computer and that in real life it works like that. But in real life, the Flask application would be running into a remote server, and it is us, the users, who by writing the URL or the address, we can get or ask for that specific HTML and for that specific page that corresponds to the URL that we are indicating here. Is that clear? Okay, nice. So I think we might take a 10 minutes break and then we get back here, okay?